Previously from the Hood Blogger.
So he got hit 7 times, bro, by the cops, and he survived that still. So, as him recovering in the hospital, he was sick at that point in time. I know some people say... Hood Blogger, SV Twiz, Raw and Uncut, you already know how I carry it. Shout out to everybody that been rocking with the content, bro. Salute to the new subs and all of that, man. I appreciate y'all. We on the road to 20K. If you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that sub button and all of that. And if you're a returning viewer, bro, and you ain't hit that sub button, bro, what's the hold up, my guy? Make sure you hit that sub button. Follow me on the gram at SV Twiz, but let's just get straight into it. Quan, aka Q Don. We always talk about Philly legends on this channel, like the Figures, State Prop, Ram Squad, Philly Most Wanted. The list goes on, but it's a few that we don't talk much about and that you don't hear people talking about, like the youngsters, Jedi Mind Tricks, Bahamadia, and Naam Brigade. Today, I want to give y'all the story of Quan from the group Naam Brigade. And it's kind of tricky because this was during the time when they were actually TASC 4OURSE, and they obviously switched from TASC 4OURSE to Naam Brigade, but TASC 4OURSE was the original group, and the original 4 members was Isis, Sunny Black, Rambo, and Q Don. Now, this right here, this story is so deep because not only did they lose a member of their group, but this also played a major role into the steps that went further in their career after this situation happened. So we're going to get into it. Before we get straight into the story of what happened with Q Don, I want y'all to get a little understanding of who Naam Brigade is for those of y'all that don't know. So Naam Brigade, they basically got it out of the mud, bro. They had the streets of Philly on fire, and from my understanding, I believe they all were from Southwest. I kind of like compare their situation to like the Major Figures and all that, as far as them knowing each other before the deal and pushing music in the streets. The only difference is when Naam Brigade received their deal from Elektra, they did it all as a group. Like, if y'all remember with the Figures, like they was getting like the deals were pretty much getting split up. Like they had the Dutch and Spade and all of that. Like their group was getting broken up, but Naam Brigade remained as one group. And when they went in that studio, they always made magic. During this time, bro, Philly was lit. We had AI on the sixes. We was able to enjoy seeing AI and Kobe go back and forth on that court. And this was just at a time when Philly was on fire. Even the Eagles, even though we ain't win the Super Bowl and all that round then, that was around the time when we had got McNabb and all of that. So Philly was just lit. But during this time when they was with Elektra, it's crazy. They was working on the album, and when they was working on this album, they was getting features from like a lot of major artists. You know what I mean? And if y'all want like more of a backstory on them outside of this video, make sure y'all check out the Naam Brigade interview with Philly Fame. They got an interview with them, and they pretty much give details of the artists that they work with. But what I am going to point out is, because I don't want to make this full story about the actual group, but what I am going to point out is, they was working with a guy at the time when they was with Elektra. The guy was named Jay Brown. And one of the songs that, TASC 4OURSE at the time was working with, while they was working with Jay Brown, one of the songs was All I Need, which we ended up knowing to be Jay-Z song, talking about like on the Blueprint, which ended up being major, you know what I'm saying? And when it came to Hove just pretty much sped the beat up, but he kept the title the same and everything. And that, I believe, was supposed to be like their second single. And on top of that, their first single was supposed to be Lights, Camera, Action. The song that we heard from Mr. Cheeks. I'm talking about the Lost Boys. And y'all know that song went crazy. And it was crazy because they actually was in VA and they had that whole album recorded, bro. The whole album recorded, you know what I'm talking about? It was ready, it was locked and loaded. They had features with a lot of artists and they had relationships with a lot of artists as well. They even spoke about, you know, at the time where they was when they was wearing like chains around their waist, and Tretch from Naughty by Nature had asked them, what do that resemble with the chains around y'all waist? And they said, this for all my, homies that's locked up. And Tretch ended up taking that, you know what I'm talking about. And, at the end of the day, it was so crazy back then because during this time, especially coming out of Philly, you had like Philly Most Wanted. Like, it was a lot of groups that, was pushing between the late 90s to the early 2000s. But everybody that was coming out and was moving, they was actually hot. And, obviously, Naam Brigade ended up being one of those groups. It's just that they never was able to get pushed. And the reason that they was never able to get pushed was because of the death of Q-Don. It threw everything off. They had the full album recorded. So this is exactly what happened. They was out VA. They had recorded that album. They came back to Philly. And if I'm not mistaken, the club name is Club Evolution, I believe. And basically what happened was, with them coming back to Philly, Q-Don had went to Club Evolution. And it was crazy because as him leaving out of Club Evolution, it was actually, some guys, they was, jamming people in the parking lot. It was just a mess. Like, they was jamming people. Then, they was like laying people down out in the parking lot of the club, and then shots ended up being fired. And during the shots ended up being fired, Q-Don happened to have been coming out of the club, and during the time when he coming out the club, it's already a bunch of stuff going on with the guys that's trying to take the money or whatever. So as they trying to take the money, eventually, shots ended up being fired from the guys that was taking the money, allegedly. And, shots was just flying. And Q-Don unfortunately ended up getting hit by one of the stray bullets. He ended up getting hit in his head and all of that. And that was pretty much how Q-Don ended up losing his life. The bullet was not meant for him. He just happened to have been coming out of that club at the time when the people that was doing what they was doing, they just ended up letting off the shots, and it just happened like that. And I believe it was also either one or two other people that lost their life that night, because basically the guys, they just started, letting it off in a crowd of people, almost similar to how, Spinach had went out, where it was, a group of people, and it was just, random shots getting let off, and they just hit, innocent bystanders. Q-Don, what ain't had nothing to do with it. It wasn't meant for him. But with him, losing his life like that, Elektra did not allow Naam Brigade to release that album. So, they pretty much stopped the album from coming out. And then that's how, like I told y'all earlier, the guy Brown, that's Jay-Z folks, he ended up, getting that song, All I Need, to Jay-Z. He ended up getting that lined up and swinging it to Jay-Z. What I can say about Naam Brigade is that they were very smart, because their music wasn't allowed to get released for some reason. I guess obviously because the Q-Don was going, which I don't understand why. If they put the music out, it was already recorded. I don't see why they couldn't have. But obviously with the labels, it's a bunch of politics. But what I can say is that they gave Jay-Z consent, and they also gave Mr. Cheeks consent, and they still, to this day, they get paid from those tracks. So it's not like, Jay-Z or Mr. Cheeks, they, ended up stealing the music from him and all of that. Like, it wasn't one of them type of situations. But even though they're getting paid off of it, we know that those songs was major hits for the early 2000s. You know what I mean? Lights, Camera, Action was a major hit, and they spoke as well of them having Eve on the actual feature and stuff like that. So, as time went on, that's pretty much what went on. They never really got pushed as a major. They did try to push another album out, I believe, like mid 2000s, but we do know that Naam Brigade, they took off again at the time when they had, like the full Naam Brigade with, when they had added Meek Mills and all that, to the group. And for those of y'all that don't know, I'm not talking about Meek Mills from the Dream Chasers. And that's a whole nother story. That's as well, public information where, it was issues with that name as well. But, knowing that the era that Meek he come from my era, the groups that we heard back then on the radio, you would hear the groups, but you didn't really know their names. Anything besides like major figures and obviously state property back then, it was hard to really pinpoint all of the group member names. Even, being younger, we knew who the Ram Squad was, but me personally, if you would have asked me back in 2000 to name the members of the Ram Squad, I couldn't, but I knew of the Ram Squad and their songs and stuff like that. But yeah, that's pretty much what happened with Q Don, from Naam Brigade. It was an unfortunate situation. And Naam Brigade is also, like I said, one of the groups from Philly that, don't really get mentioned. You know what I'm talking about. But this SV Twiz, the Hood Blogger, y'all know how I carry it. Keep the requests coming as far as the videos y'all want me to drop and speak on. My IG posted throughout the video, SV Twiz, DM me, or just drop them in the comments, man. But most importantly, man, stay safe. Make sure y'all like, subscribe, and all of that. Comment, you know what I'm saying? And that's all I got, bro.